I used to run the Dallas, Mexico route like I owned it.
Midnight drives, back roads only I knew. Prison crushed me, but not the way I expected. Paydays that made you feel untouchable. This is how a border runner became a man on a mission.
If you'd told me back then that Mama would be baptizing people in the Detroit River instead of running drugs across the Mexican border, I'd have laughed until I cried. My name's Carlos, and I'm standing here today to tell you about the most incredible transformation I've ever witnessed. Not some Hollywood movie, not some book you read in church. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about what happened to my mother over 25 years of hell and redemption. Maria Elena Vasquez wasn't just any drug runner. From 1995 to 2010, she was one of the most reliable mules on the Dallas-Mexico corridor, moving product that would eventually poison communities from Texas to Michigan. But before you judge her, before you write her off as just another criminal who got what she deserved, you need to understand what desperation looks like through the eyes of a 19-year-old single mother with a baby and no options. This was the Dallas of the late 90s, when NAFTA had just opened the floodgates between Mexico and the United States, creating opportunities for both legitimate trade and something much darker. The cartels were getting sophisticated, and they needed people who could blend in, who could cross borders without raising suspicion, who were hungry enough to take risks that could either set them up for life or destroy them completely. Mama fit the profile perfectly. Young, pretty, desperate, and smart enough to learn the game quickly, but not smart enough to understand that the game always wins in the end. She'd grown up in Oak Cliff, the part of Dallas where dreams go to die slow deaths. Her own mother cleaned houses for rich white folks in Highland Park, making barely enough to keep the lights on. When Mama got pregnant with me at 18, my father, if you can call him that, disappeared faster than morning mist on the Trinity River. So there she was, 19 years old, high school dropout, baby on her hip, living in a one-bedroom apartment where the roaches outnumbered the square footage. The legitimate world had nothing to offer her except minimum wage jobs that wouldn't even cover daycare, let alone rent and food and the basic dignity of keeping your child clothed and clean. That's when Ramon found her. Ramon was what they called a talent scout, a smooth-talking predator who cruised the poorest neighborhoods looking for women exactly like my mother. Women who were beautiful enough to not draw suspicion, desperate enough to take insane risks, and isolated enough that nobody would ask too many questions if they disappeared for days at a time. "Mija," he told her over coffee at a truck stop on I-35, "you got something special. You got that clean look, that honest face. Border guards, they gonna look at you with your baby and think young mother visiting family in Mexico. They ain't gonna look twice." The money he offered was stupid good, more than Mama had ever seen in her life. $5,000 for a weekend trip to Juarez, with all expenses paid and a guarantee that nothing would happen to her or her baby. It seemed like a gift from God to a woman who'd been praying for any kind of miracle. What Ramon didn't tell her was that the first trip was always easy. They wanted you to feel safe, to think it was simple money for simple work. What he didn't tell her was that once you crossed that line, once you became part of their operation, getting out wasn't a matter of choice. It was a matter of survival. For 15 years, my mother lived a double life that would have broken most people's minds. Monday through Wednesday, she was just another struggling single mom in Oak Cliff, dropping me off at school, working part-time at a grocery store, trying to blend into the background of normal American poverty. Thursday through Sunday, she was Maria Elena, professional drug mule, carrying everything from cocaine to heroin to synthetic drugs across borders that might as well have been drawn in crayon for all the security they provided to someone with her skills. She was good at it, too good. The cartel started giving her bigger loads, longer routes, more responsibility. Dallas to Detroit, Dallas to Chicago, Dallas to New York. Always driving, always smiling at border guards and state troopers, always carrying death in her trunk while her 5-year-old son slept in the back seat, oblivious to the fact that his mother was slowly destroying communities all across America. But every empire falls eventually. And when you're a woman in a man's game, when you're an employee instead of a boss, when you're expendable the moment you become a liability, the fall is always harder and faster than you expect. The end came on I-75 just outside of Detroit in 2010. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong Michigan State trooper who'd seen enough drug runs to recognize the signs. One traffic stop turned into a vehicle search. One vehicle search turned into a federal case. One federal case turned into 25 years in prison. I was 15 years old when I watched my mother get sentenced in a federal courthouse in Detroit, hundreds of miles from the Texas home we'd never see together again. The judge called her a poison peddler and a cancer on American communities. The prosecutor painted her as a calculating criminal who chose money over morality. But I saw something different in that courtroom. I saw a woman who'd made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, and now she was about to discover that sometimes God's greatest mercies come disguised as our worst nightmares. Because 25 years in federal prison isn't just a sentence. It's a complete dismantling of everything you thought you knew about yourself, your life, and your relationship with the divine. Mama was about to learn that redemption doesn't come easy, it doesn't come quick, and it definitely doesn't come without breaking you down completely before building you back up into something you never imagined you could become. This is her story. This is my story. This is what 25 years of transformation looks like when a woman decides that rock bottom isn't the end, it's the foundation. FC Wauseka sits in the middle of Minnesota farmland like a concrete island in an ocean of corn. If Dallas was where Mama's old life died, Wauseka was where her new life was going to be born, though neither of us knew it at the time. I was 16 when I made my first trip to see her, riding a Greyhound bus for 12 hours through the Midwest winter, carrying a bag of approved snacks and a heart full of anger that I didn't know how to process. The woman I saw across that visiting room table looked nothing like the mother who'd raised me. Prison had already started changing her. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were gone, replaced by a beige uniform that made everyone look the same. But it was her eyes that scared me. They had this hollow look, like she was staring at something I couldn't see. "Mija," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand through the glass partition, I'm so sorry for everything I put you through." For the first year, those visits were torture for both of us. Mama was drowned in guilt, shame, and the slow realization of how many lives she'd helped destroy during her 15 years running drugs. I was drowned in anger, abandonment, and the impossible task of explaining to my high school classmates why my mother was in federal prison. But something started changing during year 2. Mama had joined a Bible study group led by an older woman named Sister Margaret, a former bank robber who'd found God during her own 20-year sentence and had been leading spiritual programs at Wauseka for over a decade. At first, Mama went just to have something to do, some way to pass the endless hours that stretch between dawn and darkness in a place where time moves like cold honey. "I ain't religious, sister," Mama told her during their first conversation.
I ain't even sure God exists, and if he does, I'm pretty sure he ain't interested in somebody like me." Sister Margaret just smiled, that knowing smile of someone who'd heard the same words from hundreds of broken women over the years. "Baby girl," she said, "you think you're here by accident? You think coincidence got you to a Bible study in a federal prison in Minnesota? Honey, God's been chasing you down highway corridors for 20 years, and he finally caught you." The transformation didn't happen overnight. For months, Mama sat in those Bible study sessions like she was watching a foreign movie without subtitles. The language of faith, the concepts of grace and redemption and forgiveness, none of it made sense to a woman who'd built her entire adult life around survival, self-reliance, and the cold mathematics of risk versus reward. But slowly, something started cracking open inside her. It started with the other women's stories. Linda from Chicago, doing life for conspiracy charges related to her husband's drug operation. Patricia from Los Angeles, serving 15 years for money laundering. Jennifer from Atlanta, locked up for running a prescription pill mill. All of them were mothers. All of them had made choices that,
while Mama was finding salvation in a Minnesota prison, I was discovering my own version of hell in the place we'd always called home. Oak Cliff, after Mama's arrest, wasn't just different. It was like living in a house where someone had died, except the ghost was my own childhood, and the mourners were neighbors who whispered behind my back everywhere I went. I moved in with my abuela, Mama's mother, in the same duplex where Mama had grown up. Abuela Carmen was 73 years old, diabetic, barely getting by on Social Security, and suddenly responsible for raising a 15-year-old grandson whose mother was facing a quarter century in federal prison. "Mijo," she told me the first night I slept in Mama's old room, surrounded by posters of Selena and crucifixes that hadn't protected anything from anything. "Your Mama made mistakes, but she ain't a bad person. Don't you ever let nobody tell you different." But the world didn't see it that way. At W.H. Adamson High School, I became that kid, the one whose mother was in prison, whose family was connected to the drug trade, whose last name carried the stench of federal charges and cartel connections. Teachers looked at me sideways, waiting for signs that I was following in Mama's footsteps. Classmates either avoided me completely or tried to befriend me because they thought I had connections to drugs and easy money. The truth was, I didn't know anything about Mama's real business. For 15 years, she'd protected me from that world, kept me innocent, let me believe she was just working hard to provide for us. Finding out the truth during her trial was like discovering that everything I'd believed about my life was a lie. Some nights, I'd lie awake in that tiny room, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how the woman who'd read me bedtime stories and helped me with homework and cheered at my Little League games had spent half my life carrying poison across state lines. How do you reconcile those two versions of the same person? Abuela did her best, but she was fighting her own battles. The stress of raising a teenage boy while dealing with her daughter's imprisonment aged her rapidly. Her diabetes got worse. Her arthritis flared up. Some mornings, I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table, crying over bills she couldn't pay and prescriptions she couldn't afford. "Your Mama, she used to help with these things," she'd say, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "Now it's just us, mijo. We gotta figure it out." I got a job at 16, working nights and weekends at a grocery store in Bishop Arts District, stocking shelves and mopping floors for minimum wage. The money helped with basics, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. We started shopping at food banks, using government assistance, accepting charity from church members who knew our situation. The hardest part wasn't the poverty, it was the shame. In Oak Cliff, everybody knows everybody's business. Word travels fast when someone gets arrested, especially on federal charges. Some people were sympathetic, understanding that desperation makes people do desperate things. But others saw our family as a cancer that had brought federal attention to the neighborhood, and they weren't shy about expressing their opinions. "That boy's gonna end up just like his mama," I heard Mrs. Rodriguez tell her daughter outside the corner store. "Bad blood runs in families." Those words hit like physical blows, especially because part of me wondered if they were right. Was I destined to follow the same path? Was there something in my DNA that would eventually lead me toward crime and destruction? The anger was eating me alive. I started acting out at school, not major infractions, but enough attitude and defiance to land me in the principal's office regularly. I got into fights with classmates who made jokes about drug dealers in federal prison. I skipped classes, let my grades slip, stopped caring about anything that required planning for a future I wasn't sure I'd live to see. Abuela was worried, but she didn't know how to help. How do you guide a teenage boy through trauma that you don't understand yourself? How do you provide stability when your own world has been turned upside down? That's when the letters started coming from Wiseka. At first, I didn't want to read them. I was too angry, too hurt, too confused about everything Mama had put us through. But Abuela insisted, sitting me down at the kitchen table and making me read every word while she watched. The early letters were full of apologies and regret. Mama trying to explain decisions that couldn't be explained, expressing remorse for pain that couldn't be undone. I wasn't ready to hear it. In my 17-year-old mind, sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't pay Abuela's medical bills or erase the embarrassment of having a mother in federal prison. But as the months passed, the letters started changing. Instead of dwelling on the past, Mama began writing about the future. She shared details about the programs she was completing, the women she was mentoring, the ways she was trying to make amends for the damage she'd caused. She wrote about books she was reading, classes she was taking, conversations with other inmates that were changing her perspective on life. Most importantly, she started writing about me, not as her victim, but as her inspiration. "Mijo," one letter read, "every day in here, I think about the man you're gonna become. I think about the choices you'll face, the temptations you'll encounter, the opportunities you'll have to make a different kind of life than the one I chose. You got intelligence I never had, opportunities I never saw, and a grandmother who loves you more than life itself. Don't let my mistakes define your future. Use them to build something better." Slowly, despite my resistance, those letters started having an impact. I began to understand that Mama's story wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was about transformation and redemption. The woman writing to me from prison wasn't the same woman who'd been sentenced in that Detroit courthouse. She was becoming someone new, someone who'd found purpose in the worst possible circumstances. By my senior year, something had shifted in my perspective. Instead of feeling ashamed of Mama's incarceration, I started feeling proud of her transformation. Instead of hiding from our family story, I started sharing it, first with close friends, then with teachers, eventually with anyone who would listen. I wrote my college application essays about growing up with a mother in federal prison, about learning to separate a person's worst choices from their essential worth, about discovering that redemption is possible even in the most impossible circumstances.
Those essays got me into the University of Texas at Dallas on a partial scholarship, with financial aid covering the rest. The kid from Oak Cliff, whose mother was a convicted drug runner, was going to college. The night before I left for orientation, I sat in Abuela's kitchen reading Mama's latest letter, which contained a passage that I'll never forget. Mijo, you are living proof that cycles can be broken, that children don't have to pay for their parents' mistakes, that grace is more powerful than genetics. Every achievement you earn, every positive choice you make, every life you touch, it's all part of God's plan to bring good out of evil. I may never get to walk you down the aisle at your wedding or hold your children in my arms, but I get to watch you become the man I always knew you could be. That's a gift I don't deserve, but accept with gratitude every single day. Reading those words, sitting in the same kitchen where I'd spent so many nights angry and confused and afraid, I realized something profound. Mama's imprisonment hadn't just changed her, it had changed me too. I'd learned resilience, empathy, and the difference between judging someone's actions and dismissing their humanity. I'd also learned that love doesn't stop at prison walls, that families can heal across great distances, and that sometimes the most powerful transformations happen in the people who are watching from the outside. As I packed my bags for college, I made a promise to Mama and to myself. I would use our story not as an excuse for failure, but as a foundation for success. The boy who'd been raised by a drug runner was about to become a man who would spend his life helping other families break the cycles that had once trapped his own. March 18th, 2035. After 25 years behind bars, my mother walked out of FCI Waseca carrying a Bible, a certificate in addiction counseling, and the kind of peace that can only come from
Casa de Esperanza opened its doors on a sweltering August morning in 2036 in a converted warehouse in West Dallas that Mama and her growing team of volunteers had spent 6 months renovating with donated materials and endless hours of prayer-fueled labor. The building wasn't impressive from the outside. Concrete walls, barred windows, a location in an industrial district where most people only went if they had business there. But inside, it was transformed into something that had been missing from that corner of Dallas for decades. A place where families destroyed by addiction and incarceration could find practical help, spiritual healing, and most importantly, hope. Mama's first service drew 37 people, mostly family members of current inmates, former addicts, and a few curious neighbors who'd heard about the woman preacher who'd spent 25 years in federal prison. She stood behind a podium made from reclaimed wood, wearing the same Target dress she'd worn for her first sermon, and delivered a message that would define Casa de Esperanza for years to come. "We ain't here to judge nobody's past," she began, her voice carrying the authority of lived experience. "We ain't here to pretend that good intentions erase bad choices or that saying sorry fixes everything you broke. We're here because we understand what it means to fall so far that you can't see light. And we're here because we discovered that sometimes the darkest places are where God does His best work." Word spread through the communities that Mama had once helped poison with drugs. The same networks that had once carried information about drug transactions now buzzed with news about Maria Elena's transformation. Some people came out of curiosity, wanting to see if the change was real. Others came out of desperation, looking for the kind of hope that seemed to radiate from the woman who'd somehow found peace after losing everything.
Within a year, those metal folding chairs were packed every Sunday morning and Tuesday evening. Former addicts sat next to mothers who'd lost children to overdoses. Ex-convicts shared fellowship with families who were still waiting for loved ones to come home. Young people who were considering following the same path Mama had walked listened to testimonies from people who'd lived to regret those choices. The congregation grew not through slick marketing or celebrity endorsements, but through the most powerful force in neighborhoods like West Dallas: authentic transformation. When Mama preached about the emptiness of easy money, people listened because she'd had more money than most of them could imagine. When she talked about the pain of destroying families, people listened because they'd seen the wreckage she'd caused. When she promised that change was possible, people listened because the change was standing right in front of them. I became Casa de Esperanza's family reunification coordinator, using my professional experience as a social worker to help families navigate the complex process of healing relationships that had been damaged by years of addiction, crime, and incarceration. We developed programs that connected inmates with their children, helped families prepare for reunification, and provided practical support during the difficult transition period after release. The hardest part ain't staying out of prison, I tell families during our orientation sessions. The hardest part is rebuilding trust with people you love when they have every reason not to trust you. My mama and I had to learn that forgiveness is a process, not a moment, and healing takes time, even when the love never died. Word spread through the communities that Mama had once helped poison with drugs. The same networks that had once carried information about drug transactions now buzzed with news about Maria Elena's transformation. Some people came out of curiosity, wanting to see if the change was real. Others came out of desperation, looking for the kind of hope that seemed to radiate from the woman who'd somehow found peace after losing everything. Within a year, those metal folding chairs were packed every Sunday morning and Tuesday evening. Former addicts sat next to mothers who'd lost children to overdoses. Ex-convicts shared fellowship with families who were still waiting for loved ones to come home. Young people who were considering following the same path Mama had walked listened to testimonies from people who'd lived to regret those choices. The congregation grew not through slick marketing or celebrity endorsements, but through the most powerful force in neighborhoods like West Dallas: authentic transformation. When Mama preached about the emptiness of easy money, people listened because she'd had more money than most of them could imagine. When she talked about the pain of destroying families, people listened because they'd seen the wreckage she'd caused. When she promised that change was possible, people listened because the change was standing right in front of them. I became Casa de Esperanza's family reunification coordinator, using my professional experience as a social worker to help families navigate the complex process of healing relationships that had been damaged by years of addiction, crime, and incarceration. We developed programs that connected inmates with their children, helped families prepare for reunification, and provided practical support during the difficult transition period after release. The hardest part ain't staying out of prison, I tell families during our orientation sessions. The hardest part is rebuilding trust with people you love when they have every reason not to trust you. My mama and I had to learn that forgiveness is a process, not a moment, and healing takes time, even when the love never died. Jennifer, my wife, started leading support groups for children and spouses of incarcerated individuals. She'd never experienced the criminal justice system personally, but she'd lived with its effects secondhand through her marriage to me, and she understood the unique challenges faced by families who love people behind bars. People don't realize that when someone goes to prison, their whole family serves time, she explains to new group members. We're all affected by their choices, all dealing with shame and isolation and fear. But we're also all part of the healing process when they come home. Our 3 children, Maria Elena, named after her grandmother, Carlos Jr., and little Sophia, grew up understanding that their abuela's story wasn't something to hide from, but something to learn from. They called her Abuela Esperanza and loved hearing her tell stories about the women she'd met in prison, the lessons she'd learned during her darkest moments, and the miraculous ways that God had used her worst choices to prepare her for her greatest calling. Casa de Esperanza's impact extended far beyond Sunday morning services. We established job training programs for former inmates, addiction counseling groups, financial literacy classes, and legal clinics that helped people navigate the complex process of rebuilding their lives after incarceration. But perhaps most importantly, we created a space where people could tell the truth about their lives without fear of judgment, where the worst mistakes didn't disqualify anyone from grace, where families that had been torn apart by crime and addiction could slowly, carefully begin to heal. Every month, we held what we called testimony nights, evenings where community members shared their stories of fall and redemption, of mistakes and second chances, of lives that had been broken by poor choices and rebuilt by persistent love.